Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were behind the wheel of a stolen Ford, sunlight cutting through the trees, their path clear, their fate sealed. They didn't know 6 men with rifles and shotguns had been waiting in the brush since the night before. A trap set with patience and precision. When the car rolled into view, the lawmen stood, took aim, and opened fire. More than 100 rounds tore through the metal, glass, and flesh. By the time the echo faded, the car was still and Bonnie and Clyde were gone. The coroner's report painted a picture of brutality, dozens of bullet wounds, no chance of survival. But what came next was stranger. Locals rushed to the scene, scavenging pieces of the legend, shell casings, scraps of clothing, even strands of hair. One man pulled out a pocket knife and tried to cut off Clyde's ear. That's how deep the fascination ran. 2 small-time crooks had become icons of rebellion, symbols of love and violence intertwined. Their fame was morbid, but it stuck, feeding the American obsession with outlaws and the chaos they leave behind. We remember the men, Capone, Dillinger, Luciano. Their faces became the mythology of organized crime. But what about the women who ruled, killed, and stole alongside them? Bonnie Parker wasn't the only one. There was Stephanie St. Clair, the Harlem numbers queen who went toe-to-toe with Dutch Schultz. Kathryn Kelly, wife of Machine Gun Kelly, who masterminded ransom plots and ran circles around federal agents. And Opal Long, the Mack truck, a woman built for survival in a man's world of bullets and betrayal. These women were strategists, shooters, and survivors, carving their names into the same bloody history books. The underworld remembered their names even when history tried to forget. They called her Mob Girl, not because she held all the power, but because she walked into the lion's den and lived to tell the tale. Arlyne Brickman was born in 1934 on New York's Lower East Side, a neighborhood raw with ambition and danger. From the start, she was drawn to the underworld. She idolized Virginia Hill, once saying, "In my eyes, here was a broad that really made good." She began running with Italian mobsters, spending nights in mafia-run nightclubs, riding in Cadillacs, making connections. Plots of drug dealing, numbers running, and loan sharking pushed her deeper into hard territory. But the rules weren't the same for her. She discovered that despite her boldness, her Jewish heritage barred her from full acceptance in the Sicilian-dominated syndicates. When she was assaulted by associates of a mobster, she found no help because she was a woman and Jewish, she later said. Her breaking point came when a loan shark threatened her daughter Leslie unless Arlyne paid off a debt. That threat hit a tender spot. She made a choice. She would cooperate. She met with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, agreed to wear a wire, and began infiltrating the very syndicate she'd once served. Over the next decade, she gathered testimony, assisted investigations. In 1986, her evidence helped convict Anthony Scarpati of the Colombo crime family, along with others on racketeering conspiracies. She refused the witness protection program, saying it was the quickest way to get killed. In the end, she walked away from the glow of the gangster life, but not without scars. She died on January 18, 2020 in Bal Harbour, Florida, alone and suffering from dementia. Arlyne Brickman's story is a study in paradox. She seized power where she could, ran errands for mafia bosses, pushed boundaries. Yet she also paid the price of being an outsider in her own ranks, used by the system she exploited and ultimately turned against it. She didn't fit the established mold, and by refusing to accept it, she changed the rules of the game in her own way. It began on August 29, 1909 in Indiana, when Mary Northern Kinder was born to Louis W. and Viola J. Tansey Northern. Her early life was ordinary in many ways. By 1910, the family was living in Washington Township, Morgan County, Indiana. By 1920, they had moved to Indianapolis, where her father was working as an engineer at a factory. Mary's life took a sharp turn when she became involved with the criminal underworld. She became the girlfriend of Harry Pete Pierpont, a key member of the Dillinger gang led by John Dillinger. In 1933, Mary Kinder was named to the Chicago Police Department's Public Enemies list, one of only 2 women so listed alongside Pearl Elliott. On September 26, 1933, a daring prison break occurred at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. Pierpont, along with Charles Mackley, John Red Hamilton and others, used pistols smuggled in to escape. According to sources, Mary Kinder played a role in the aftermath, driving an automobile that delivered the escapees to a safe house run by Ralph Saffel. In January 1934, the gang holed up in Tucson, Arizona, after a fire at the Hotel Congress exposed them. Mary Kinder was arrested there and held as a material witness. Her association with the gang placed her at the margins of violent crimes: the kidnapping of Edward Bremer, the multiple bank robberies, the shootouts, the jailbreaks. While she may not have pulled the trigger, she helped enable those who did. Mary Kinder struggled after her time with the gang. She battled alcoholism, lived outside the spotlight, and slipped into obscurity. She died on May 21, 1981, in Plainfield, Hendricks County, Indiana, from emphysema and heart disease. Mary Kinder's story reminds us that the underworld was not only composed of the men whose names go down in history. Women like her played roles, supporting, enabling, surviving. Her life prompts us to ask what happens when the spotlight fades and the consequences remain. Kathryn Kelly was born Cleo Lyra Mae Brooks on March 18, 1904, in Saltillo, Mississippi. She changed her name to Kathryn before marrying her first husband at just 14 years old, and by 1919 she had given birth to her only child, a daughter named Pauline. Kathryn's early life was marked by instability and movement. Her parents divorced, her mother worked to support the family, and Kathryn drifted into multiple marriages. Her third husband was a bootlegger named Charlie Thorne, whose death under suspicious circumstances did not lead to her being convicted, though she was linked to the incident. It was after she met George Machine Gun Kelly, born George Kelly Barnes, that Kathryn's role in crime became unmistakable. The pair bootlegged together in Fort Worth, and Kathryn allegedly orchestrated many of the moves. She even bought the machine gun that gave her husband his notorious nickname. Their most infamous act came in July 1933, when they kidnapped oil baron Charles F. Urschel in Oklahoma City. Kathryn helped plan the abduction and hid Urschel on her mother's farm until the ransom of $200,000 was paid. But even after the money changed hands, Kathryn reportedly pressed for Urschel's death. That kind of ruthlessness helped confirm her status as more than an accessory. The law caught up with them. Kathryn, George, her mother Aura, and her stepfather Robert Shannon were all convicted. Kathryn and her mother were sentenced to life in prison. Shannon received 25 years. George Kelly died in prison. After serving 25 years at a women's correctional facility in West Virginia, Kathryn and her mother were released. She changed her name to Lyra Cleo Kelly, moved to Oklahoma City, and worked quietly as a bookkeeper. She died on May 28, 1985, at the age of 81. Kathryn Kelly's story forces us to look at the underworld differently. She was no passive partner. She shaped the crime, influenced the plan, and accepted its consequences. And in doing so, she challenged the gender expectations of her time, showing that in the shadows of the 1930s, power didn't always wear a man's face. Helen Julia Godman was born on December 4, 1888, in Chicago. She came from a family tied to the racetrack world and telegraph wires. Her father, Otho Godman, was a telegrapher and race sheet writer. In 1907, she married Tell Taylor, the popular songwriter and music publisher in Chicago. They divorced in 1910. By 1916, Godman was involved in what's known as a badger game, a scheme where a victim is lured into a compromising situation, then extorted. In that incident, she used the alias Alice Williams and persuaded Edward R. West, a wealthy widower and executive, to travel with her to New York. There, two men posing as federal agents arrested West under the pretext of a violation of the Mann Act. He was coerced into paying around $15,000 to avoid scandal. Godman was indicted in the scheme, but she skipped bail and vanished for several years. Eventually, the charges were dropped in 1921 for lack of evidence. In the 1920s, she moved in social circles tied to gambling, high-stakes racetracks and nightclubs. She became the protégée of Charles A. Stoneham, the owner of the New York Giants baseball team, and with interests in Havana, Cuba. Her Park Avenue apartment became a locus for criminals and gamblers, Arnold Rothstein, Oni Madden, and others. The major turning point came in 1932. Under the alias Helen Smith, she was arrested and convicted for grand larceny in New York in a case involving the fencing of $305,000 worth of stolen jewels from businessman Harry C. Glemby. She began her prison sentence on November 17, 1932 at Auburn Prison, New York. She died on January 7, 1945 in Sunnyside, Queens, New York. At the time of her death, she used the name Helen Daniels, widow of Charles Daniels, and was buried at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. Helen Godman's life intersects with entertainment, high society, gambling syndicates, and the underworld. Her journey shows how ambition, access, and the world of organized crime blended in ways few women of her era fully traversed. She was neither saint nor solely victim. She was part of a system and eventually caught in its gears. It started in the fall of 1907 on a reservation in Wisconsin. Evelyn Billie Frechette was born on September the 15th of that year in Neopit on the Menominee Indian Reservation. Her father was French, her mother half French and half Menominee. When she was 8, her father died and her education took her to a boarding school in Flandreau, South Dakota. By 18, Billie left the reservation for Chicago. She worked as a nursemaid and waitress, trying to make a place for herself in a city that offered little space for someone like her. In November 1933, the woman who would become part of a national crime saga crossed paths with John Dillinger at a dance hall in Chicago. She was 26. He was about 30. She later remembered, "There was something in those eyes that I will never forget. They were piercing and electric, yet there was an amused, carefree twinkle in them too." Their relationship unfolded amid the chaos of a criminal life. Dillinger was America's most wanted man. Billie was not a shooter, she later said, but she became part of his orbit. She cooked, cleaned, bought clothes and cars for him, even once drove a getaway car when police discovered their apartment in St. Paul and Dillinger was wounded. On April 9, 1934, federal agents arrested Billie in St. Paul for harboring Dillinger in her apartment. From a block away, Dillinger sat in his car, unable to act without risking his own life. Billie was tried in federal court and sentenced to 2 years in the federal prison farm at Milan, Michigan, for violating the harboring statute. She served her time and was released in 1936. After her release, she turned the turbulence of her past into a public lecture. She joined a touring show called Crime Doesn't Pay, traveling the country with members of the Dillinger family and speaking about her experience. She returned to Wisconsin, to the quieter terrain of her childhood. She married twice more, walked away from the headlines, and died of cancer on January 13, 1969, in Shawano, Wisconsin, age 61. Billie Frechette's story forces us to look at crime not as glamour, but as consequence. She was not the mastermind. She was the companion, the woman who lived the aftermath. Her life invites a harder question. How much of the underworld's myth was hers, and how much simply the echo of choices she followed? It all began when Bernice Opal Long stepped into the fray of the early 1930s Midwest crime landscape. Records suggest she was born in Texas, though her early life remains murky. She became known by the nickname Mack Truck, a moniker linked to her large frame and presence in the underworld. She married Russell Lee "Booby" Clark, born August 9, 1898 in Vigo County, Indiana, a robber and one of the core members of the Dillinger gang led by John Dillinger. Through that marriage, Opal's life became entwined with the gang's operations. She was at times their caretaker and protector, a role less glamorous than robber, but essential. Sources note she cooked for the gang, kept their hideouts, and moved among them as though family. In the autumn of 1933, the gang was in motion, executing bank thefts, planning escapes, constantly moving. Russell Clark stood among the key players. On January 10, 1934, Clark and Opal Long arrived in Tucson, Arizona, ahead of the others in the gang. On January 22nd, a fire broke out at the hotel the gang was using. Within days, authority tracked them, Clark was captured, and the net closed in. Long's loyalty did not waver. Even when her husband was arrested, she remained aligned with the gang's network. She was later arrested too during the Tucson episode after physical confrontation with officers. She fought back, reportedly slamming a hotel door on an officer's hand and sustaining head injuries herself. Unlike many women associated with these crime waves, Opal Long did not become a public enemy in the same way some others did. Her story is quieter, less documented, but it underscores an important truth. The underworld relied not only on the men at the guns, but on women who supported, sheltered, facilitated. She operated in the shadows, not seeking headlines. Her later life is poorly recorded. What is certain is that she never turned on the gang. She refused informant status, choosing silence over betrayal. Opal Long's story invites reflection. She inhabited a world where allegiance meant endurance. She was neither the mastermind nor the foot soldier. She was caretaker, co-conspirator, survivor. And through her, we glimpse the unvarnished machinery of the crime world. Not the glamour, but the logistics. Not the headline, but the uncelebrated operator. Virginia Hill was born Oni, Virginia Hill, into a large working-class family on August 26, 1916 in Lipscomb. When she was 8, her mother moved the family to Marietta, Georgia, after her parents separated. She left school after completing the 8th grade. By the early 1930s, she had drifted to Chicago. She worked briefly in the hospitality business and lived on the fringes of the underworld. Her associations drew the attention of the criminal network known as the Chicago Outfit. She began serving as a courier for that organization, moving messages and funds for high-level gangsters. Around 1945, Virginia entered a relationship with Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a prominent mobster heavily involved in the early development of Las Vegas. Their association drew her further into the world of organized crime. Siegel became deeply invested in building the casino hotel known as the Flamingo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Popular lore links the hotel's name to Hill's nickname, the Flamingo, because of her love of gambling and her high society image, but reliable sources note that the name originated earlier. Over time, Hill's lifestyle became increasingly extravagant. She owned property in Beverly Hills, moved in Hollywood circles, and maintained connections with both entertainment figures and criminal operators. Siegel's death in June 1947 at the Beverly Hills home he shared with Hill marked a turning point. Investigators believed his murder was tied to skimming and mismanagement of the Flamingo Project. Hill's presence there tied her to the fallout, though she maintained many denials. In 1951, she testified before the Senate's hearings on organized crime, yet she denied having knowledge of criminal operations despite her background. By the mid-1950s, she faced tax and immigration issues and left the United States for Europe. On March 24, 1966, in Koppel, near Salzburg, Austria, Hill died of an overdose of sleeping pills at the age of 49. Her death was officially ruled a suicide, though speculation about other causes continues. Virginia Hill's story is layered with glamour, danger, and consequence. She was neither the mastermind of the underworld nor its naive bystander. Her life offers a window into how criminal enterprises operated, not only through muscle and money, but through people who navigated both society's upper echelons and its darkest margins. It began in Hillisburg, Clinton County, Indiana, on October 21, 1887, when Pearl MacDonald Elliott was born to John Newton MacDonald and Mary Bell Booker MacDonald. She grew up in Frankfort, Indiana, in a working-class household. By the 1920s, Elliott had moved to Kokomo, Indiana, and operated a high-profile brothel and rooming house on North Washington Street and North Market Street. Police records show repeated charges of operating a house of ill fame, and her business was widely known to harbor fugitives and gang associates. In 1925, after the robbery of the Southside State Bank in Kokomo, Elliott allegedly hid the robbers Harry Pete Pierpont, Ted Skier, and Earl Northern in her boarding house. As the decade progressed, her establishment became a haven for men on the run, bolstered by corruption and protection from local authorities. Her ties to the gang world deepened. By December 1933, she was flagged by the Chicago Police Department as one of only 2 women on its public enemies list, labeled an associate of the notorious John Dillinger and his network. Investigators reported that she served as treasurer and advance fixer for Dillinger's gang, handling hidden funds and safe houses. One report alleged that she helped dispose of $40,000 in bonds after the November 20th, 1933 robbery in Racine, Wisconsin. In early 1934, police launched raids on properties linked to Elliott. On January 25, 1934, a boarding house formerly under her control was raided by the Indiana State Police, based on tips that gang members were expected there. She eluded police roadblocks on U.S. Route 31 in mid-February and was sighted in Kokomo in April, prompting continued surveillance. Her health, however, was deteriorating. Reports from November 1934 indicated she was dying of an incurable disease at her mother's home in Clinton County. On August 10, 1935, Pearl Elliott died at her mother's home in Clinton County, Indiana. She was 47 years old. Her cause of death was listed as carcinoma. Pearl Elliott's story isn't about glamorous heists or gun battles. It's about how the underworld depended not just on robbers and shooters, but on infrastructure, the safe houses, the dollars in motion, the hidden network that made crime possible. She occupied a quiet yet critical role, operating from the shadows, facilitating the men who made the headlines. Her presence forces us to see the underworld's ecosystem, where women like her held power quietly and dangerously. She was born Arizona Donnie Clark on October 8, 1873, in Ash Grove, Missouri. She later assumed the name Kate Ma Barker, mother to 4 sons. Ma Barker's life was entangled into the margins of the 1920s and 30s underworld of America. Her sons became embedded in the gang life of bank robberies, kidnappings, and violence. And though her exact role remains disputed, her name became iconically tied to their crimes. The Barker family lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma for a time. The sons drifted into criminal acts early: auto thefts, burglaries, violent confrontations with law enforcement. By the early 1930s, the core of what became the Barker Karpis gang was in place, led by her son Fred Barker and his associate Alvin Karpis. Ma Barker traveled with the gang, rented safe houses under false names, handled bills and logistics, and moved constantly to stay ahead of law enforcement. The Barker Karpis gang committed robberies of banks, post offices, payrolls, and they also engaged in high-profile kidnappings. One notable kidnapping was of Edward George Bremer Jr., for which they secured a ransom. The FBI records indicate Ma Barker traveled with the gang during the Minnesota, Chicago, and Florida years of the operation. On January 16, 1935, federal agents located the gang's hideout in Ocklawaha, Florida. Ma Barker and her son Fred were in the house under the alias Mrs. Anderson at property 13,250 East Highway C-25. When agents moved in, Fred opened fire. A long gun battle followed. By the end, both Fred and Ma Barker were dead in the front bedroom. According to the FBI, a Thompson submachine gun was found near Ma's body. After her death, then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover declared her the most vicious, dangerous, and resourceful criminal brain of the last decade. But historians remain skeptical. Many argue that Ma Barker's role as mastermind is largely myth. She may not have planned the crimes. Some contend her presence was more of a familial shield than an active strategist. Ma Barker's story remains potent because it challenges the stereotypes of gang leadership. Here was a woman at the center, however loosely defined, of one of the most violent criminal operations of the Depression era. She embodied fear in the public's imagination, but also raised questions about how much of legend and how much of fact defined her life. Martha Edna Stanley was born to Nicholas and Luella Stanley in Marion, Kansas, around 1898. She moved early in life with her father to Oklahoma, a region where the outlaw legacy ran deep. As a teenager, she married a man named Pedden and in 1915 gave birth to a son, Preston. Her first marriage failed. She later married a man named Walter Price, another union that ended. Her path then pulled her deeper into the fringes of crime. She met jewel thief Diamond Joe Sullivan and married him. Sullivan was convicted for murder of a policeman in 1923 and executed in 1924. After Sullivan's death, she married Jack Murray. On October 1st, 1925, Edna and Jack were sentenced in Kansas City, Missouri for a holdup. The records show 25 years for their crime. It was this Kansas City holdup that gave Edna her nickname from the press, the Kissing Bandit, after she allegedly planted a kiss on one victim, H. Southwood. On May 2, 1927, she escaped from Missouri State Penitentiary. She remained free until her arrest in Chicago on September 10, 1931. She escaped again on November 4, 1931 for a day, and on December 13, 1932, she soared through the bars of her cell with help from another inmate, Irene McCann, and escaped once more. Edna then reconnected with longtime criminal partner Volney Curley Davis, with whom she had previously been involved. They drifted north, settled at times in Aurora, Illinois, and became affiliated with the Barker Carpis gang. On April 23, 1934, the duo sheltered wounded outlaw John Red Hamilton, who died of his wounds a few days later, in their home in Aurora. On January 22, 1935, Edna was indicted for conspiracy in the kidnapping of wealthy Minnesota banker Edward Bremer, the $200,000 ransom case. She fled. On February 7, 1935, she was captured in Pittsburgh, Kansas, while traveling with outlaw Jess Doyle. Though she was not convicted of the Bremer kidnapping, she was returned to the women's prison in Jefferson City, Missouri, to complete her term for highway robbery. Her cooperation with authorities followed. While in prison, she wrote articles under the headline, "I was a Carpis Barker gang moll," and gave testimony against gang associates and corrupt officials. On December 20, 1940, she was paroled from that prison. Edna Murray died in San Francisco in 1966. Buried there, the kissing bandit of the headlines long faded. Her story is not one of glamour, but of consequence. She rode with the gangsters, escaped the pen repeatedly, aligned herself with violence, and eventually paid the price. In her decades of running, hiding, and confessing, she revealed the cost of being on the fringes of the underworld. They called her Madame St. Clair in Harlem. Elsewhere, she was Queenie, a name spoken with equal parts respect and fear. Stephanie St. Clair was born on Christmas Day, 1887. In Guadeloupe, a French Caribbean island. She grew up the daughter of a single mother, poor but proud. By her teens, she'd already learned how to survive, working, saving, and dreaming of something larger than the island horizon. Around 1912, she made the leap to America, landing first in Montreal, then settling in New York City. Harlem was where she found her stage. The neighborhood was changing. Black families were arriving from the South, immigrants from the Caribbean were carving out lives of their own, and a new kind of economy was taking shape in the shadows, the numbers racket. By the early 1920s, St. Clair had built her own operation. She ran the numbers out of Harlem storefronts, offering cheap bets to people who couldn't dream of Wall Street but still wanted a chance at luck. She was organized, intelligent, and unshakably confident. Her network of runners and clerks brought in thousands every week. It was said that by the mid-1920s, she was earning over $20,000 a year, real money, especially for a black woman in Jim Crow America. When Prohibition ended, the white gangsters who had ruled the bootlegging trade came looking for new turf. Dutch Schultz, the Bronx mobster with a reputation for brutality, decided Harlem's gambling business would be his next empire. But St. Clair refused to bend. She wasn't about to hand over her streets to anyone. The war that followed was fought out in the open, gunmen on corners, threats in the papers, and storefronts destroyed. Schultz's men leaned on her bankers. St. Clair fought back by exposing his corrupt allies in the police department. She bought space in Harlem newspapers and published open letters warning residents about crooked officers and their ties to organized crime. She ran her numbers, yes. But she also told her people to vote. to know their rights, and to stop letting the system bleed them dry. For every dollar she made in the underworld, she spent another trying to pull her community upward. By the late 1930s, the balance of power began to shift. Harlem's new broker was Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson, a younger man who made peace with the Italian mobs. St. Clair stepped back, she invested her earnings, dabbled in legitimate business, and stayed vocal in local politics. Her personal life turned chaotic. She married Sufi Abdul Hamid, an activist known as the Black Hitler, for his fiery speeches, but the relationship turned violent. During one argument, St. Clair shot him. She served time for it, though she never apologized. In her later years, she lived quietly in Harlem, still elegant, still sharp. When she died in December 1969, the world had nearly forgotten her name. But in her time, she ruled a kingdom without permission. Stephanie St. Clair was more than a crime boss. She was a woman who refused to be erased by men, by the mob, or by history itself. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born on October 1st, 1910 in Rowena, Texas, to Charles Henry Parker and Emma Krause Parker. Her father died in 1914 when Bonnie was just 4. After his death, her mother moved the family to an industrial suburb of West Dallas, Texas, known then as Cement City, to live closer to relatives and find work. In school, Bonnie was regarded as a good student. She showed aptitude in English composition and writing. She was small in stature, some sources list her at under 5 feet tall, and she had interests that extended beyond what one might expect of someone destined for infamy. In her second year of high school, Bonnie met Roy Thornton. On September 25, 1926, 6 days before her 16th birthday, she married Thornton. The marriage was troubled. Thornton had brushes with the law and was often absent. By January 1929, the two had separated, though they never divorced. Bonnie still wore his wedding ring when she died. Around this time, Bonnie was working at Marco's Cafe in Dallas until it closed in November 1929. Bonnie first met Clyde Barrow in early January 1930. They met at the home of a friend of Clyde's, Clarence Clay, in West Dallas. Bonnie was 19, Clyde was about 20. Clyde had already been immersed in crime, stealing cars, safecracking, and prison time. With Bonnie's involvement, they would soon join an extended gang and begin a spree of robberies, kidnappings, and murders across the central United States. Though popular culture often depicts Bonnie with a Tommy gun in hand, historical accounts suggest her exact role is more nuanced. Some gang members' testimony indicates she did not regularly fire weapons in the major shootings. Between roughly 1932 and 1934, Bonnie and Clyde, along with the members of the so-called Barrow Gang, conducted robberies of gas stations, cafes, small stores, and yes, some banks. Their crimes escalated in violence. They are believed to have murdered at least 9 police officers and several civilians during their run. The law enforcement hunt intensified after December 1932, when 2 stolen Fords led to tracing of vehicle thefts back to the pair. On January 1, 1934, and in surrounding months, they were involved in a daring escape from the Eastern Prison Farm in Texas, during which 2 prison guards were killed. On May 20, 1933, a federal warrant was issued against Bonnie and Clyde for transporting a stolen vehicle across state lines. Their run ended on May 23, 1934. In the early morning, law officers from Texas and Louisiana lay in wait beside a rural highway in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. When Bonnie and Clyde appeared in their Ford, officers opened fire. More than 100 rounds were expended. Both were killed instantly. Bonnie Parker's legacy is fraught. On one hand, she became an icon. On the other hand, historians stress the mythologizing of her role. She may not have been the machine gun-wielding femme fatale often portrayed. Her poetry, including works like The Story of Bonnie and Clyde and Suicide Cell, reveals a young woman with creative impulses, not merely the outlaw caricature. It began in Garvin, Oklahoma on January 1, 1911, when Benny Ivor Caldwell was born into a one-child household ruled by her father Matthew Fonton Caldwell and her mother Lillian Bell Pond. Her childhood was marked by upheaval. Her parents divorced while she was still young. She was raised chiefly by her father, a logger and farmer. At age 17, she was married off in an arranged marriage to John Calloway, a much older man. The union was unhappy. Blanche later said she fled and rarely looked back. In the autumn of 1929, while hiding from Calloway in Dallas County, Blanche met Marvin "Buck" Barrow on November 11th. He was the older brother of Clyde Barrow and already steeped in crime. She was 18, he was 8 years her senior. They married soon afterward, and Buck escaped from the Texas prison farm in March 1930. Blanche hid with him, and though she claimed she wanted a quiet life, she found herself pulled into the orbit of Buck and Clyde's gang. In March 22, 1933, Buck received a full pardon. He and Blanche joined Clyde, his partner Bonnie Parker, and teenage accomplice W.D. Jones in Joplin, Missouri. The gang stayed at 3,347.5 Oak Ridge Drive. Trouble followed fast. On April 13, 1933, local police confronted the group in Joplin. 2 officers, Constable Wes Harriman and Detective Harry McGinnis, were killed during the shootouts. The gang abandoned the hideout, leaving behind undeveloped film and documents that made national headlines. Over the next weeks, they moved relentlessly, the pressure mounting. On July 19, 1933, they were in Platte County, Missouri at the Red Crown Tourist Court when a posse led by Sheriff Holt Coffey broke in. Bullets flew. Buck was hit in the head, Blanche was wounded by flying glass from shattered windows. Her left eye lost sight, her right was damaged. Barely 4 days later, near Dexter, Iowa, Buck was shot 6 more times. Blanche refused to leave him. They were captured together. Buck would die of his wounds days later. Blanche was charged with assault with intent to kill Sheriff Coffey. She pled guilty and was sentenced. She served 6 years of a 10-year term before being paroled in 1939. After prison, she moved to Dallas in 1939 to care for her father. In 1940, she married Eddie Frazier. The following year, she completed her parole. They adopted a boy named Ricky in 1965. Her husband died of cancer in 1969. She watched from the margins as her life became legend. The 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde included a version of her character. She consulted on the film, but later said that the portrayal by Estelle Parsons was a screaming horse's ass. Finally, on December 24, 1988, Blanche Barrow died of lung cancer in Dallas at the age of 77. She was buried in Grove Hill Memorial Park under the name Blanche B. Frazier. Blanche Barrow's story is rarely told with the same ferocity as Bonnie Parker's, but it matters. She entered the outlaw world to stay with her husband. She was wounded, captured, imprisoned, and when freed, she chose anonymity over infamy. Her life shows another face of the gang era, a woman trapped in violence who survived it, changed it, and lived afterward.